Hello, welcome to Natick Is United Youth Panel Racial Justice Discussion. My name is Guimel DeCarvalho. I'm one of the co-coordinators of Natick Is United, along with Lee Manuel and Miriam Hernandez Jennings. Why are we here? Our goal for this conversation is to open a dialogue with Natick youth of color to hear and understand their experiences and to offer an opportunity to have a dialogue with school officials about those experiences. This panel is focused on youth, education, and racial justice in Natick. I want to underline that this discussion was designed and guided by the youth in a meeting that we had prior to this discussion here today. Just a couple of quick agenda reminders, housekeeping. Our audience can submit questions in the Q&A, so you can look for that button underneath at the bottom of your screen for that. We have disabled the chat at this time because we want to offer an opportunity for people to really focus on what our panel is saying. So if you have any questions, concerns, please submit it in the Q&A. For right now, what we're going to do is a couple of quick introductions of our panelists. For our youth, we have Layla Christian. She graduated in 2020. She's currently attending Spelman and is on a pre-med track and looking to become a surgeon. We also have Kaya Moore, a Natick High School alum, now attending the illustrious Clark Atlanta University and HBCU, a sophomore majoring in education. While a full-time student, she is currently working beside Phillips Brooks House Association, an educational organization run by Harvard University to help further educate young and excellent Black children that live in the urban area of Boston, Massachusetts. We have El Martinez, a mixed white Afro-Boricua non-binary activist who uses they, them pronouns based out of Natick. Common themes throughout Elle's work include diversity in schools, sex-positive education, and the achievement of equity through public policy. Elle is active on many different levels, having served as the GSA president, the sponsor of a bill in the Massachusetts legislature, and a member of GLSEN's National Student Council, and more. They seek to bring an intersectional perspective, harm reductive practices, and a culture of accountability to every space they occupy. We also have Izzy DePaulo Garcia Perez, who graduated in 2017 and is currently attending Boston College, majoring in English and minoring in Latin American Studies and History. She's looking to graduate this year from BC and recently returned from a trip in Ecuador and is looking to attend graduate school for environmental public policy. We have as well from the school side, Dr. Anna Nolin, who is the superintendent of schools for Natick Public Schools, where she's worked in various leadership capacities for the last 17 years. She's worked as a middle level educator in Metro West for the past 24 years, teaching a variety of things and doing curriculum development and consulting. Beginning with her years as a teacher in inner city New York City schools, Dr. Nolan's longstanding focus around middle schoolers revolves around community organizing and building community partnerships to support the development of student resilience. Dr. Nolan currently serves as a member of Natick Is United's board as well. We have Principal Brian Harrigan. Principal Harrigan became the principal of Natick High School in 2015 and is now in his 6th year. He also teaches a principal advisory class about leadership, inclusion, and where students can really be all of themselves. And we have also from school committee, Dr. Donna McKenzie. As a graduate of Natick schools from kindergarten through high school and a member of the first class of METCO students at Kennedy, racial justice is a long-standing concern for Dr. McKenzie. She has a master's of divinity degree as well as a doctorate in healthcare ethics and has written on apartheid medicine and bias and exclusion in healthcare. She's serving in her 2nd term on the Natick School Committee and has served as town meeting member for over a decade. She's a member of Natick Black Lives Matter, and in addition to being an independent scholar with years of university teaching experience, has worked part-time as a Catholic chaplain at Babson College. We also have our facilitator here today, Melissa Patrick. Melissa Patrick is a Natick resident who has been doing anti-racism work for almost 30 years, using her formal training as an educator, social worker, and learning and development professional. She works with clients to advance their various sectors such as education, healthcare, finance services, and faith-based organizations in their diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. Melissa is also on the board of Natick Is United. And finally, and most importantly, she is the mother of 3 great kids, and 2 of them attend Natick High School. As I said, my name is Guimel DeCarvalho. I'm a co-coordinator with Natick Is United. I will be serving as moderator and co-facilitator today. And my central thing is, as a Natick resident, I'm dedicated to an anti-racist future for Natick. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Melissa, who will center us for our conversation today. Melissa?
Thank you, Guimel. Welcome, everybody who's attending. Welcome, panelists. This has been a long anticipated panel. And as Guimel said, we have met with youth and we've done our best, and we hope that this panel is youth-centric. We're going to focus on 4 topics tonight. The topics have to do with sort of the overall climate of the school experience, the curriculum from the youth perspective, accountability, and the support networks that our youth experienced or did not experience during their schooling experience here in Natick Public Schools. Before we get started with the questions and our discussion, I did want to say that in the spirit of Natick Is United, we really believe these conversations are crucial to deepening our understanding of each other and forwarding racial justice and equity here in Natick. And so we're going to hopefully have a conversation and listen without judgment and just share and be our authentic selves. Being a practicing an anti-racist practitioner, somebody who has been steeped in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space for such a long time, I'm keenly aware of the power and control dynamics between groups and identity. I did ask our youth, our alums, about how they wanted to refer to our to Dr. Nolin and Principal Harrigan and our guest school committee, Donna, McKenzie. And the decision was made that however they want to. Okay, so we did talk about how we're going to be referring to each other, and it's their choice. And without any further ado, I'm going to open up the first question to our youth. Our alum, I'm going to refer to you as our alum, our illustrious alum. Okay, so this question has to do first with the overall climate in terms of your experience in Natick, but specifically your schooling, K-12. And who would like to share first? Izzy.
I can go first. I have been at Natick High and we're in Natick Public School System for a majority of my time in the education system. I first went to Memorial School in Upton for kindergarten and then ended up at Benham for first grade and then Johnson for the rest of my elementary school. And then I went to Wilson where Anna was my principal at the time, and then I ended up at the high school. I think for me, as a graduate that has been out for several years now, and needing to reflect on that multiple times over the past few years, there have been kind of some clarifications, I think, for me in terms of what was more passive racism versus what was kind of overt over the years, especially my senior year, which was the election year last time around. And I think that was really, I would say, the culmination of a lot of racism in the school system for me. Growing up, it was a little bit different, I think, because Johnson was quite small, Benham was quite big, but I was quite young. So the memories of those kind of have faded away. Wilson, I think, was a little bit different as well. I had a different focus on academics and kind of friends. And I would say it's part of the reason the school is pretty insular in terms of, or the school system in the town is not as diverse. So those conversations weren't something that came up quite often when I was that young. And once I got to high school, it definitely became a bit more of a part of conversation, whether that be in literature classes or something brought up in history or the news. There's always mention of it, but I feel like it's a subject people, especially for younger children, they don't want to broach within the school system, even though it is a major part of people's lives. I think once I got to high school, particularly in senior year, I can remember a lot more of the more passive and overt kind of racism that I had experienced in terms of the climate. I think there's a lot of casual comments that are thrown around a lot of the time. A lot of people will do things like, I remember my senior year, a very specific Halloween incident in terms of costumes, and people dressing as like the wall that Donald Trump wanted to build, as illegal aliens and kind of jumpsuits. But it was kind of, I think, pushed away from, I would say, like my grade's knowledge in some ways. I think we all remember it, but I think it was brought up this summer on social media and things like that to kind of remind people that it really was my grade that had that issue. And the thing is, I grew up with these people and I know them. And as a result, it was quite disheartening as having family that is in Mexico. And I would say that was something that definitely didn't leave for quite a while. And I feel like that might have been seen more as passive racism instead of overt racism in some ways. I think similarly with more passive racism, the post election kind of egging on of kind of like insults or comments and things like that were quite common. People talk, especially children and teenagers as they're growing up, but there was very few people who I thought would be reprimanded. And I think the one clear case for me of kind of like the overt racism was an incident in, I believe it was post-election in the fall. And it was an incident of writing on a second floor girls' bathroom stall of telling people to go back to the country. And the post result of that and the conversations that we had in class were, I think, quite damaging.
Okay. Thank you, Izzy. So part of my role as facilitator is to make sure that everybody we can share the airtime, and I really appreciate your sharing that experience. And as you shared, I was thinking perhaps you've been in the Natick school system since first grade, as you shared. So that reveals that you are a resident of Natick. So I'm thinking, so who would like to go next? Okay, Layla. Yep. Okay, let's have Layla share, and then Elle, and then Kaya. And so what we're going to do is perhaps maybe about 3 minutes each, and I'll jump in. Thank you, Layla.
So again, my name is Layla Christian. I go to Spelman College. I'm a bio major on the pre-med track. I plan to be a surgeon. So I've been going to Natick Public Schools. I've gone to Lilja, then I went to Wilson, and then the high school. I've experienced race and racial issues since Lilja, since I started going to that school. I used to have, race was always on my mind, and I used to have kids come up to me like, oh, why are you so black? They'd mention my skin color. And honestly, from day one being in Natick, race was always at the forefront of my mind when it came to meeting people from the town and whatnot. It made me feel almost like an alien or just someone completely different very early on. And I think that's what stunted my ability to be a leader until later in high school when I signed up to join PAC in my junior year. Sorry, I'm nervous, but also just to speak on what Izzy said as well. My freshman year was 2016. it wasn't a great introduction to the high school. Like she said, there were poor choice in costumes from a lot of the seniors. And as a Black student, it was like, is it always going to be like this? Especially with the poor experience I had in Wilson, a group, my friend group, they were all Black except for one white, one girl, she was white. We typically sat together and we were profiled by a teacher. And I remember this will always be a very clear memory. We were profiled by a teacher and she actually made us sit apart, and she would follow us around the lunchroom to make sure we were sitting away from each other because she said we were loud. And we felt like it was a race thing because days before, a kid did a backflip at laps for lunch at Wilson, which is something we have where kids can walk around outside during lunch. He did a backflip. They've had rap battles that have been inappropriate. And it felt like, why are they singling out us when there are so many other kids doing things at lunch, being loud and whatnot. All this to say that Natick hasn't been great, but I can definitely say that the high school was when school started to get better. Peers started to realize and be more, and not all of them, but some of them, they started to be more understanding of race and what it meant to be racist and how not to be. I mean, I can't say that I haven't had instances where someone said the N-word. Actually, I'm on my way to the senior lot after school last year, before the shutdown, of course. I was walking and it was Black History Month, and I heard a kid yell the N-word, hard ER. And it kind of made me realize how far we still have to go. And I think because I willingly ignored it, I don't know. I love Natick. I know that there's so much to be done, but it's upsetting and disheartening, like Izzy said, when you hear those things and you see those things. And hopefully we will get to a point in the future where everyone can feel safe and comforted in this community.
Thank you for sharing. I'm sorry that you had to hear that. And we'll get back to some of the experiences of being hyper visible sometimes, as Black students are, or students who are in the numerical minority that stand out are. There's an issue of hypervisibility as well as invisibility sometimes. Elle, you were next. Please share.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being so vulnerable. I am Elle Martinez. I use they, them pronouns. I am studying social work at Simmons University virtually, so I am still living in Natick. When I think about the climate of Natick public schools in regards to race, I think about, until very recently, pretty much a culture of silence. I think that Izzy talked about the incident with the Mexican costumes during her year, and a lot of people don't know that Mexican costumes have actually happened every year that I've been at Natick High. There's a picture of a Mexican costume in the yearbook I have to remember my senior year by, and that's painful. I think that it's been really frustrating for me as someone who's been involved with almost every kind of diversity, anti-racist initiative possible in my time at Natick Public Schools, specifically at Natick High. The ways in which it feels like we haven't learned, the graffiti incidents, there are many graffiti incidents that happened in my time in Natick Public Schools and Natick High School. There are many instances of, for example, people yelling the N-word, like Layla said, many instances of people saying very, very, very racist, violent things about Black people on social media. It almost feels like we haven't learned because the events kept happening over the course of my time at Natick High. And there comes a point where the climate feels exhausting, and you really feel like you're fighting something that you can't do anything about. But I think that overall, what's most frustrating to me about the climate that exists within Native public schools is the ways in which incidents like graffiti or incidents like a Nazi salute don't get talked about outside of the school, and the community as a whole don't know about it unless the students say something, and I think that's a problem.
Thank you, El. Kaya.
Hi everyone, I'm Kaya once again. So for me, I would say that my experience and within the climate at Natick High has been like, okay, it has been decent for me at least. When I had began, I was very open to making new friends. I was not very aware of like the idea of racism or anything coming from, I started in 6th grade coming from a Boston public school surrounded by a lot of young Black men and women. I didn't really understand. So I was just very open. I didn't look at anybody as different. And since we were so young, I feel like I was very welcome in at the time. And I made a lot of people that were very different from me, and I got to make a lot of good relationships with them and make good connections. And that just sparked me to, want to do a lot of things, be a part of Natick Public Schools and do a lot of things. And I wouldn't say it wasn't until I started to get older that I kind of realized the types of very muted, very calm racist type of things that were happening. For example, something that I never realized was an issue and something I should have spoke out about is my 7th grade year having somebody that was close to a lot of the MECO students, which is the program I was a part of, asked me because I had gave the lunch lady $100 bill because I had got honor roll, and my godmother gave it to me as like a congratulations. And I went to go get a snack with that. And the lunch lady asked the lady that was close to us to ask me where I got the money from. And so she pulled me aside after lunch and she had asked me like, hey, the lunch lady was just kind of concerned because you tried to pay for your snack with $100 bill. We just wanted to make sure it wasn't drug money or anything like that. And I was just kind of like, no, why would it be that? Like, I had no idea. I'm in 7th grade. So I was like, no, of course not. But, as I got older, I kind of started to realize the reality of what it really was. And it just like really just started to open my eyes to what I really had in front of me. And as my junior and senior year, I really started to take precautions around the people that I chose to hang myself around, because it's just a lot more so. There's a lot of people within the community that don't really understand what they're doing as racist, or they do, but they're just unaware or they don't care. And with that, it just kind of drew me back in a sense, not to say that everybody in the Natick public schools was like that. There were a couple people I was gladly able to become like very close with and feel secure to be able to stay at their houses and stuff. But it's definitely a hard mixture between like a lack of care and a lack of people that actually understand and get it. And I feel like if there was like a little bit more like, acceptance and welcome, and more so of like, looking at us like regular human beings, like we have a different skin color, but we're just like you. I feel like that would make a lot of things a lot more easier for a lot of us at Natick Public Schools.
Thank you so much. Hopefully those attending can understand why it's important to start out this conversation with hearing about our guests' experiences. So I thank you very much. I did see that there was a question about what is hyper visibility, and in predominantly white spaces, our Blackness tends to stand out. And at the same time, our Blackness isn't necessarily talked about or ignored because race isn't talked about in predominantly white spaces. So there's this paradox of being hyper visible where we stand out. And then we're also invisible because race is not addressed explicitly. So that answers that question in terms of what does hypervisible mean. And it is used in conjunction with invisible. Guimel, did you have something you
Yeah.
wanted to add?
I thought there's a question that came in here, and given the conversation that just happened, I wonder if maybe we could just flip a little bit the order of the agenda and just talk a little bit about accountability at this juncture and
I'm
bring in the
fine.
question.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
so one of the questions from the audience is a question for the alums, and I'm sure that the school folks can touch on this as well. But is the culture at the high school one that encourages and validates students and staff of color to challenge the racism that they experience at the school? Or are students of color, BIPOC students' concerns minimized and invalidated when they speak out? I don't know if one of you would like to have a, so I guess I see Izzy and then I see Anna, but
Mhm.
Izzy, go ahead, Melissa, sorry.
No, let's hear from Izzy and then Dr. Nolin. Anna.
I think in my experience, having been an alum for so long at this point and having been in college for quite a while, for me, looking back as part of, I lead a retreat called 48 Hours at BC, and this is my second year leading it as someone who's also been on it, and it does kind of teach you to reflect and look back at your freshman year and the transition you made from high school to college. And one thing that I did have to note was that a lot more of my concerns about race were taken quite more seriously when I got to BC, mostly because the school was a decent size bigger than the high school, and there were more diverse administrators at the college that I go to. Still not as much as other schools and other places across the country, but it was different because racism, especially in regards to our current administration in the government, wasn't the same as it was when I was in high school for a long time. Most of my high school and my elementary school and middle school career were taken up with the Obama administration for 8 years. So that had a very different connotation around race than the election did during my senior year. And especially as that was one of the major topics of conversation my senior year, that was one of the big things that I felt only certain teachers really were able to get to the point of conversation. There were only a few, I'd say, safer spaces to have conversations and trustworthy spaces. But it required the teacher to really step up first and create that space for long term, where some teachers, you know, there's not as much opportunity in, I would say, like a math class to have that kind of conversation and bring that up. But in other classes where it was a bit more part of the curriculum, it was a little bit easier to have those conversations. But of course, it wasn't, you know, universal experience. I was really lucky with the teachers I had, and that I'd had them before, and I'd had built a relationship with them to the point where I felt like I could have a conversation about this.
Thank you, Izzy. Anna?
I just want to give just a little background, I guess, about myself, because it informs leadership, right? So I'm one of 9, grew up in northern New Hampshire, all girls, 100% white. I didn't meet a person of color until I went to college, and didn't meet a person of color until I went to college. And that was really eye-opening. I got myself into a teacher education urban think tank, and I was one of 2 white women with 50 people of color, and I had a lot to learn. Found out I grew up in a very racist household, and there is a racial identity development piece that all of you have just spoken about, where your consciousness has come to be when you were older. And that's not typically a white journey unless it's forced. And I'm happy to say I was forced to have that conversation and that self-reflection. I'm still having that. It's 27 years later. And that's a conversation that I have to have with myself every day. So I want to just say that, because not every white person's having that conversation with themselves. It's a hard conversation to have. And you have to be okay with all of the difficulty and the emotion and the learning that comes with that. So I will say to you that in terms of the culture of Natick High School, and I answered Carrie Lynn here in the chat, there's a continuum of how a predominantly white school system responds to issues. My biggest concern is that there's sometimes not the urgency on the part of our white educators that is demanded and necessary for the health and well-being of our students of color. So I, as an administrator, and Mr. Harrigan, we sit in this ugly space of having the urgency and knowing the need, and having to bring people on a continuum they may or may not see the urgency around. So when that happens, as administrators, there's a legal response we can have. There's a procedural response, a disciplinary response, an ethical response, and then there's an emotional humanity response. That those are all the things that are in this brew that is this administrator. And Mr. Harrigan is one of my closest colleagues in this work. So one, we're worried about, do the things that you know about even come to us? And then two, we have to bring everyone on this journey. And three, sometimes we have to make heads roll. And four, sometimes we have to make heads roll and you don't get to know we made them roll, and that we took it on, and that we went to court over it, right? And so those are the things that are constantly happening for us. But it is not foreign to us that these are the experiences. But our job is to take all of our people on that journey and push everyone to the next best level of learning and understanding. And I'm honestly extremely grateful and sad for the moment that we are in politically, racially, in terms of understanding these relationships in our culture right now and in our community. We're in a real struggle, which is actually pushing more of those people to have that conversation with themselves, but it also creates more anger on the part of our students and our alumni. So suffice it to say, I think that sometimes the concerns are minimized and silenced, and sometimes they are brought forward. And what we worry about is it shouldn't matter which teacher or adult or moment that you come to in the Natick Public Schools. We want you to be heard, and we want the response to be the right one. And we can't guarantee that right now. We can't. I don't think any school system or community could. But that is part of the core values. But it's a struggle every day.
Can I just a quick follow-up, and maybe Kai, you might be good to answer for this, but we had a question from the audience that really touches on this, and Anna talked about sometimes you don't get to know what they did, you know what I mean, because of employment law reasons probably, and all sorts of things. But someone had a question of, do you feel that these experiences, the staff didn't report it, or they've been dismissed? And the question really that I think would be helpful to answer is if they weren't properly dealt with, what would you have wished happened, right? And I don't know if Kai, what you were going to say maybe might touch on that.
So for me, like I explained earlier, I never really understood until I was gladly able to attend a historically Black college university that there were a lot of very minimalized, like shut behind the door type of racist things that I had experienced. So for me, for that answer, I was not able to go to somebody to, say, hey, like this is the issue, this needs to be handled. I could say there are some instances where I would speak my part on things that would be more difficult for me as a Black student or a MECO student, just within waking up early and all that other stuff that wasn't really taken into consideration as well as I thought it would be. And it's just kind of 50-50 with that sense, because it's like, this is what I chose to wake up at 5:30. I chose to be on the cheerleading team, getting home at 9 o'clock at night. That's just kind of the things that I chose. But within, there being a certain type of sympathy and understanding, it was kind of 50-50 within that. So that would be my answer to that. And then to the other question that was asked when they asked a question about the culture within Natick High School and if that was ever validated or encouraged for people like us, I would say I feel like it wasn't done as best as it could be. And I say that because I only remember only having 2 teachers that looked like me. And I was never spoken to about my guidance counselors about historically Black college universities. That all came about because I mentioned it to them. And I feel like, you know, when you're taking in MECO students and you're saying, yeah, we want them here, that is just something I feel like, okay, you have to, you know, try to learn, do your part, get more people in the school like them. If you're getting like a lot of, hey, like comments, like, you know, stuff like that. And I feel like there just wasn't a lot of people that look like us, a lot of encouragement, understanding, from what I have heard from other friends that I have heard that have had bad experiences. So that would be my say on that.
Elle, I saw your hand before.
Yeah.
You all have your hands up, but I saw your hand first before when I asked something earlier. Elle.
I can just kind of be brief in terms of discussion of how we wish things had been dealt with. I wish that my emotions would have been validated before getting into detail. And I also wish that administration had asked a question other than, are you exaggerating or are you lying?
Thank you.
Izzy?
Layla and then Izzy.
I was just going to speak to Kaya's point. I go to an HBCU, and I love my guidance counselor. She was really sweet, but also I had pushback with her because because we sit down with the guidance counselor to make a list of colleges, and when I wanted to put HBCUs on the list, she kind of told me not to apply, or she pushed them to the farther part of the list. And it was something I was really passionate about, because I actually took the time myself to learn about HBCUs more rather than hear from my guidance counselors. And obviously now that I go to one, I realized how much I would have missed out had I just stuck to going to a PWI and stayed on the course of going to another Natick, which is something I didn't want because of the instances I had. And then to also speak quickly on going to teachers and administration for support, I wasn't able to. I didn't feel comfortable. And for since middle school, I did not feel comfortable talking to administrators or teachers about my personal life. I have friends with METCO students. I'm not going to speak for them, but I mean, when we used to talk about, we used to feel uncomfortable even going to teachers to talk about racial instances, because were we going to feel validated? Were they even going to accept it? Was something even going to be done? And that was disheartening. And to that point, I was in PAC my senior year, and I'm so glad that my friend pushed me to join, because I wasn't going to, because I was scared. Like, will I be justified by the administration at the high school? Am I only going to be in because I'm Black? Which a comment was made from an underclassman about me being in PAC, saying I was a token Black PAC member.
Yeah, Layla, so you've used a couple of jargony words, terms. So the first one, that's okay. The first one, PWI.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Do you why don't you say what a PWI is? It's
predominantly white institution.
right.
Sorry, I didn't know that was not a common lingo.
It's not common lingo, Layla. And then PAC, what program is PAC at the high school?
Principal's advisory class with Harrigan.
Right.
It was run by him. And I'm
Okay.
selected. It was a great opportunity. And for any parents out there with kids, I would definitely suggest joining. It was really great. It was cut short, and we weren't able to do all we wanted to, but it was great. So,
Right.
so
Did you pay her to say that, Harrigan? I would even say to you
Yeah.
that depending on who's watching this, BIPOC, it might not be known by
Right.
many people in
Yeah.
the Native community. I mean, there's a large continuum of learning to be done in our community, and you know it. That's why you're sitting here. And we care about it. That's why we're all sitting here together.
Mhm.
So I think this is a great opportunity to teach people the starts, the baby steps.
Mhm. Mhm. Brian, did you want to mention something?
Yeah, I don't want to cut Izzy off though. Izzy, were you about to speak?
Yep.
Let me defer to Izzy and then come to me.
Okay.
Okay, I can quickly go off a little bit. Just to Layla's point, I do go to PWI. Boston College is a primarily white institution, both in administrators and in staff and students. And I think that has been something that I don't regret, I would say, but I think it's something that I wish, especially for students of color, it would have been nice to know that there were other options, especially as this was one of my only real end choices for colleges. So that was something that I think if I had been exposed to more of the diversity schools or programs without other schools, I wouldn't have been so dead set on specific schools or specific programs, because at the end of the day, a majority of the schools that I did apply to, and I applied to 9, were all primarily white institutions. There were no ones really out of state, or I would say with a lot of diversity. I think that did impact some of my decision making.
Yeah.
And then I can just very quickly speak on accountability. Going back to kind of the original part was one thing that I was pretty upset by in terms of accountability was the Halloween incident that I think started a lot more Halloween incidents, I would say, in terms of like the costumes. I know that they were pretty regulated, and I vividly remember coming down the main staircase and seeing the costumes in the front hall. And that really was a kind of like, I just need to leave. I'm just going to go and walk away. But I remember seeing it on Instagram later that day. And it had said, oh yes, like one of the administrators made us take off the costumes later, like yada, yada, yada. But they were all in the photo, like all the students that they had to take off the costume, but they were in our class photo for Halloween. So I still have that in my yearbook. But also I have screenshots from those students and their Instagram posts. And I think especially as that was something highly publicized, especially during the summer, it was brought up again. And I think for me, that was something that I would have liked to see some kind of conversation about that back then. But I think even now it's a good time to have a conversation.
Mhm. Yes, Brian.
All right, so Izzy, perfect segue, because this is my 6th year. So I've had the honor of working with all of these students, and every issue that the students are talking about, I was the principal and had kind of direct knowledge and experience as part of. Let me just start by saying that Dr. Nolin and I, Dr. McKenzie, all of us do these jobs first and foremost because we want every single student to have extraordinary growth opportunities as human beings, right? The number one job of a high school principal is school culture and climate from which students learn and grow and become their authentic selves. But if you were to say, like, what is the number one responsibility that I have? It's this very conversation, right? It's to create conditions whereby students can be vulnerable, where students can reflect on their own experiences, their own mistakes. Every opportunity is a learning opportunity. I've probably in my career as an administrator done some of the best teaching when a student has made a very poor decision and I'm helping him or her sort through the implications and holding that student accountable. It looks a lot different than I think what a lot of people would think, right? A lot of people think, oh, expel the student. I've heard that a lot. Expulsion means that I've taken away that student's opportunity to get a free and public education, right? So I doubt in my career I will ever fully expel a student. Now, sometimes we will make a determination that that student is not fit to be on campus, and then we educate him or her off campus through remote means, right? But I just give that by way of example, because as the principal of a school of 1,600, my job is to love all 1,600, including those who've made a very poor decision, right? And this is not me.
Though, that there is no provision in Mass state law that allows us to expel students unless they commit a felony. So I just want people to know that, because I get a lot of calls for expelling over. So like what my heart would do is not what I can operationalize.
Right. And I'll say one of the things, and I inherited this when I arrived, this notion of restorative justice, this notion of our diversion program, where students, when they make a very poor decision, are involved in counseling and education and community service and in accountability. So what I suspect, if we actually sat down, and I can't do this, but if I was able to sit down and we could look at all of the facts of each case, we'd be closer together than we think, right? That said, I think I have a lot to learn. I think we all do, both about how students experience Natick High School and how we can come together as a learning institution so everyone can experience the growth that we're hoping they can experience. Let's talk about Halloween real quick, because we are right smack in the middle of it. Elle and I had
It's
a terrific
next week.
It's
Yeah.
next week. And we just talked to our seniors a week ago. And the basic question is, are we going to hold this thing? Are we going to cancel it? We're in the middle of a pandemic. We have two different cohorts. So if we do it, we're doing it Friday, Monday, each at half speed, without congregating, without group photos. Is it something we still want to do? And Mr. Hoy and I had the conversation with the students, and if we're doing it, we're upholding our values, because our costumes have come to a point where they're not upholding our values. And that includes when kids come representing different groups of people, that is disrespectful and hurtful and runs
And
in
racist.
Yes, and racist, and runs counter to the very principles that we hold dear. So Elle and I had this exact conversation a year ago, following some of the costumes from last senior year. And I didn't disagree with Elle then, I don't now. Part of me feels like just cancel it. Part of me also feels like, no, let's do the harder work of holding it, but then holding kids accountable for making poor decisions, and have the community conversation, most importantly before, but after if we have to.
And I guess I just wanted to say, as the longtime middle school principal and the one who revived Halloween dress up in Natick back in the day, there are community members who are not with us on this, right? So, just like we have issues with people sending their kids to school now sick or violating orders for public health, we have families who have different values than the core values of the Natick Public Schools. And those core values are around our social justice mission, but are also around our anti-discrimination, inclusion, and civil rights expectations.
Mhm.
And the Constitution in Massachusetts goes one step further and says that our duty is to cherish every student in the Commonwealth, to cherish. I don't know what you think about when you cherish, but it's not just like we tolerate everybody and we like live and let live. To cherish is a love-based scenario that includes standing up on these issues and refusing to take the Mexican dress-up wall situation, right? But not every family is on the same continuum with us either. And so that's an education situation that we also have to reach into the home, and we have to do that balance of the consequence for school with the learning and the reach into the home to say to the families, look, this isn't the way we're going to roll in this community. And that's not always an easy or an effective place for Mr. Harrigan or me or any principal to be. That said, it does not deter us, but it is a huge portion. So for like this, and groups like Natick Is United, which are not school-based, are so important for that reason, that they reach into all the community sectors.
So I saw your hand, Elle, but I'm going to segue and connect this learning and bringing people along the continuum and this consciousness of understanding difference and connect it to curriculum. So what can we do from a curricular perspective so that we can teach, and we can teach that it is not okay to dress up and mock and make fun of and choose costumes that denigrate other groups of people? So this question has to do with, so I'm going to shift the topic from accountability, and we may weave some of that into this next conversation because they're all related to curriculum, in terms of what's happening with curriculum to raise awareness, to promote racial equity and social justice values in Natick Public Schools. And this question first goes to Dr. Nolin. You can maybe pick up where you left off.
So, I mean, this is on a continuum as well. So, first of all, we're all breathing a sigh of relief that the social studies curriculum has been released last year for the Commonwealth, because quite honestly, it did not allow us to hit these issues centrally. So that's a huge relief. So as we articulate to the new standards, we're all breathing a sigh of relief. We have tried to put a social justice core to all of our humanities courses and some of our science courses for many years, along with a course on onboarding teachers that Miss Patrick actually helps us with, which talks about culture and expectations and racial bias. But I should say to you that like curriculum can take you so far, right? So each of our teachers, for instance, take a course on how to choose literature that reflects multiculturalism, all types of all genders, non-binary individual. Like we talk about how to make your curriculum reflect the students in front of you. That doesn't mean that teachers are always able to operationalize it. Second, curriculum is only as good as the professional development that allows the teachers to have the courageous decision-making and the courageous interventions that happen, because yes, there are pieces of curriculum that are lacking, but it's about not intervening when those classroom moments come up, or not knowing enough about the rest of your curriculum or other alternative views within your curriculum to bring those forward, to make an open and balanced dialogue. And that's a heavier continuum, because
Yes.
Because educators may have gone to their own white university and they had their own predominantly white schooling experience for public education or private education. And so there's the years of like tradition that you're battling, and their own positive and negative feelings about their education, their own racial identity. And then you say, now it's your job to develop these youth of color. And there's a freak out that many educators have. And we spend a lot of time helping them grow the muscles to be able to have those conversations and to create the tone. I would say to you that that is our greatest challenge right now, is helping our educators seize this moment that we're in as a country and the movement that has been afoot, and allow them to see that they are pushing forward the things they care about in their curriculum while they are cherishing students and creating the safe, inclusive environment. That's a very difficult balance, and we do it in a lot of different ways, but the curriculum is written to allow for those choices to be made. The courage has to come from the educator.
Mm-hmm.
Elle, I saw your hand up. I think you were going to respond to that, and then we see yours.
Yeah, thank you. I think I have a lot of thoughts on curriculum. I think that I'll cite an example, and Layla will know what I'm talking about. My senior year English class, my teacher introduced a new unit on The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Layla knows what I'm talking about. So she was talking about how she wanted everyone to be prepared for topics of race and racism. And I wanting to, I being pretty well versed in these topics, training Natick staff on these topics for several years beforehand, I just wanted to set a basis for the classroom. So I asked her to define racism, and she wasn't able to do that. And I sent her pages upon pages of readings after class and really hoping that she would address it. But that 30 seconds of silence, of her not knowing what to say, really sticks in my mind as an instance where curriculum being taught surrounding race being taught to kids of color, Layla and I were both in that class, by a white woman who was not able to define racism. And not even, I didn't feel like I was putting her on the spot because we were just talking about what we were getting into. But that, and I also think there's some nuance to be said specifically surrounding colonization in the Spanish curriculum. If kids of color, and I think this would especially affect Metco kids, if kids of color who speak Spanish at home or who speak Spanish with their family are penalized for speaking in dialects from where they come from, that's a problem. Like if I can't speak Spanish I can't speak Spanish to my family the same way that I speak Spanish in class. I will lose points for that. And that's a problem.
I just want to say, and my METCO students would want me to say this, that's not a particularly METCO issue. There are also resident Latino students and Spanish speaking students of all different backgrounds that would say the same.
Izzy?
I can go next. In terms of, I would also say the Spanish is just an issue, or like a topic of conversation, not particularly an issue. I think even coming to BC, one of the things that I've noticed is that I have Argentinian professors, and so they speak differently. But because they're Argentinian, because they are, at a collegiate university, one of the things they are is a little bit more accepting with grammatical differences or dialect differences. And even when I was abroad in Ecuador, one of the biggest things my professor, who is an Ecuadorian professor through BC, had explained was that she lived in Mexico for 9 years and taught there, and all of the words were completely different. Vocabulary for food, vocabulary for pretty much everything was different. And when we were up there, a lot of the words that we ended up learning relate to indigenous languages like Quechua, which is a dialect of Quechua. And as a result, everyone in, with Spanish family or Spanish speaking family will have kind of a different dialect. And I think addressing that in a classroom setting would probably be a good idea. Because of course, like I had different teachers with different dialects in the high school, and as a result, we learned, I think, a different Spanish each time we switched. So I think for me, that was something that was important. As well as for curriculum, one thing that I know particularly was that I had pretty good experiences in the English department, which is part of the reason I am like an English major as a result. But also I had the same teacher twice, and then I, having stuck with her twice, that was a little bit of more trust. And I do think as a result, one of the other conversations that is harder, I think, is AP classes in terms of literature and writing and things like that, because you are limited by kind of what AP wants you to teach and what College Board will allow you to teach and the books that they'll have you write on. So I feel like more conversation about I would say the diverse books or other books that they are bringing up would always be a good idea, because I had some of the best conversations about race and identity and things like that in, those upper level classes. But I was also high in honors student, and I was engaged in that. And I was, that's part of the things that I really enjoy. And I don't know what it was like in the other levels of the classes or other sections. And I might have just been really lucky with who I ended up with. And I think that's something that was quite hard for me to grasp, especially in relation to my other friends who didn't like English as much. And as a result, of course, like I didn't like math as much, so it wasn't my priority. So it kind of like that flip-flop but they just kind of lose out on some of that training, not with the type of thing that you're really interested or the type of thing that you're really good at. You might end up losing out on some of that training that you do for administrators and teachers and things like that. I think the other thing was that with social studies and things of that nature, especially as I'm in college, and one of the things that I'm currently in actually right now for class is it's called Leeches to Lasers, and it is a medical US history class. And it is also both history and African American and diaspora studies. So we do a lot with racism and race in US medical history. And she also teaches a class called U.S. Environmental History that I had previously taken, and
Okay.
that kind of had to do with race. So I would say working kind of race into both of like social studies and science is feasible. It just needs to be a topic of conversation.
Thank you, Izzy. Thank you for that. So I'm just going to do a quick time check because we are at 8:05. Okay. And we still have a little bit more to cover, and I do want to leave a bit of time at the end of our conversation to address some questions from those attending. Okay. Kaya, do you have your hand up? Oh, no.
I see, Dr. McKenzie, you did your electronic hand. Thank you.
I did. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me as a member of the school committee to be part of this conversation. And I appreciate so much, especially what the young people here are sharing. I do think that we live within a world of institutionalized racism, and it's so hard to escape from it. And I have mixed feelings because I don't like the burden that's put on people of color to have to always be the vulnerable ones and to teach us. And I don't really want our LGBTQ people in that situation, always having to do that. And one of the things that we do on the school committee is raise the funds for the budget for the school district. And when you're talking about curriculum, I think that professional development is really important. And sometimes when money gets tight, professional development can be cut. And I just so appreciate these comments because it is reaffirming my commitment in the importance of professional development. We need teachers who can sensitively and expertly and soundly navigate in this institutionalized racist world, and who have the skills and who also have the curiosity. We need to cultivate curiosity in our teachers too, so that when someone like Elle poses a question, it challenges them to reach deeper and to be able to answer. So just, I'm listening. So all I want to say, I'm on the school committee and I'm listening, and I really appreciate your voices. So thank you.
I would like Kaya and then Brian to comment. Kaya?
So I actually wasn't going to say anything to that, but because Dr. McKenzie had said something, I actually thought it was reasonable to say something. That just like really, I hope a lot of people took that in, because that is just, I agree that is something that would be helpful to be done, because as an education major, I have realized that sadly, what Izzy said, there are a lot of things that you can't necessarily change because that is the standard and what is supposed to be taught in those public schools. So within, the curriculum for Spanish not being technically correct, those teachers can't necessarily do anything because that is what they're told to taught, but making that allowed for them to, hey, understand, instead of marking them wrong for something that they know is technically right. Because I don't agree that that is fair to them to be actually speaking the right thing, but be penalized because that's not what they're taught. Because as an educator, you're there to teach. And if you're there to teach and help them understand, you should be willing to take that knowledge back. As me wanting to be a future teacher and, a representative of a school, I believe that that is something that needs to be understood within teachers, that you have to be able to allow the students to teach you and correct you on your wrongs instead of penalizing them. And then also with the African-American studies and stuff, and within doing that, just making sure that the right people are doing it, because I really do love Native Public Schools. I've had a lot of great experiences. But some of the classes that I took, getting back to African-American studies, sorry, I couldn't think of the class that it was. My teacher didn't seem as in as I wanted it to be. It just kind of seemed like I'm here, I'm gonna do my job type of thing, and I didn't really see it as much, but for people that really want to enjoy the class, and that now that I'm realizing it, that's not something that you can necessarily just hey, I'm here teaching it, has to be something that is well thought of. So I definitely do agree. And I really appreciate Dr. McKenzie for saying that, the teacher development, because I think that would be very helpful, because the budget is something that is very hard and difficult to really get everything that you want to implement in the school. And it may be hard for the students to see that that is what you're trying to do. So definitely with having, making sure that you're just taking the right teachers to do that job and really implementing the teacher development would be an awesome thing. So.
Well, Kaya, when do you graduate? Because you might
Can I just add an additional thing, because there's a comment from the audience that can tie in also just with this professional development and the budget also that you brought up, Donna. Just someone regarding Izzy's comment, how she's only applied to predominantly white institutions, talking about the guidance department. And I wonder if in the professional development, the guidance counselor department is brought in that as well, or other departments that aren't necessarily just the curriculum focused, because I imagine it would have been helpful for that lunch lady who made that comment to one of our panelists, also got some professional development,
The professional development is wide ranging. Sorry, Brian, I know you want to jump in here, but I also want to say that until we diversify the workforce to reflect the attendance of the Natick Public Schools, we're not going to have those authentic conversations. PLCs is like our way of doing professional learning for people. That's where the bread and butter happens, right? That's where colleague A says to colleague B, here's an alternative perspective. You have a blind spot about this. This is another way. You missed the boat with this particular student, and I can help you. And so if that authentic conversation isn't happening in the adult conversations, professional development will happen, but it might wash, right? It might just wash right over the person, or depending on where that person is in their own racial identity and reflection, they're not ready to receive it. So that's the challenge, like the when and who holds them accountable in the groups that matter most. Law and order isn't who makes a good teacher do what they need to do. It's they're accountable to their unit, their department, and their PLC.
And
Brian?
I'll say we start almost every professional development with student voices, as you have done beautifully tonight. We have to root the experiences of our students first, because every educator has taken this job and taken on this profession out of love and support for the students. About 3 weeks ago, we had the single most highly rated professional development. After every opportunity, I give a survey form to the staff for them to reflect on their learning, and on a scale of 1 to 5. The topic was to identify and interrupt microaggressions in the classroom. Khalees Warnham was our guest speaker. It was extraordinary. She did a great job, and the staff really engaged. The single most highly asked question and follow-up was, when is she coming back, right? So Khalees and I have been emailing to figure out when the 2.0, and I merely say that, not to pat ourselves on the back, but to say this is learning that our staff is really interested in. No one on staff has said, not my job. A lot of folks on staff say, I need to do it better. I have a lot to learn. We need to create an institution of emotional security where the adults can make mistakes. But the bigger mistake is to not do it at all. Right. Right at the end of our principal's advisory class, Layla, last year, we did a kind of reflection on the year. It was like late May. It was by Zoom like this. And one of Layla's comments was, I wish we had done more around culture, identity, and anti-racism. A week later, George Floyd is murdered. And all of a sudden now Natick is ready and interested and motivated. My job is to make sure that the pandemic doesn't take all of our attention away from the really important work of anti-racism in ways that challenge all of our students, not just the kids who show up to the voluntary discussion, right? And we do this work not merely for our Black and Brown students, but for all students, right, who shouldn't leave, who can't leave Natick High School without being prepared to serve in the world in which we're headed, right? So To Dr. Nolan's point, we have a social justice mission throughout our curriculum, but then we're also going to have targeted classes that are electives and maybe not electives, maybe classes that have a seminar feel that everybody takes, so that we can have one common conversation around identity, around race, around inclusion. So we have a lot to do. I'm excited to do it, and in ways that bring people along. Everybody can learn and grow, and that's our job. And to Dr. Nolan's point, we got to start with the adults sometime to get them ready, because they're going to encounter microaggressions in their classroom, and falling silent is not an option.
So I don't know, Melissa, if you were going to raise the hands, but I just,
Yeah.
we do it at a different time, but there's a couple of questions in the chat, and I just want to tell the attendees that I will be kind of asking them. So just so people are worried whether or not I'm going to get to those questions.
Right. Yeah, and I'm looking at the questions too.
Izzy, do you want to comment maybe on what
Yeah,
was
I can comment on the, I would say the part about professional development. As someone who currently works in 3 different jobs on campus, and 2 different divisions on my own campus as well, and I work in different things. I think one of the things that I've noticed, even about any kind of educational university or any kind of educational thing, is that professional development is one of the most important things. And especially within my own experience, I think the post graffiti on the wall my senior year was, I think, the case where a teacher actually told me that they had desired professional development or professional aid. And that was because the day after the incident, we went to school and we talked about it in the first period class, which was, I didn't feel very comfortable in that class talking about that conversation. My teacher is wonderful. She tried her very best to facilitate it, but she had no training in it. So this was very difficult for her. And as a result, especially being a white woman in a class of almost all white boys at the time, there were only, I want to say 6 girls total in a class of 30, and then also only 3 people of color total. So I was one of 3 and then one of 6. And I feel like she was quite overwhelmed with the kind of conversations and the things that they were bringing up. And it was very difficult to control. It's always difficult for teachers to control a class of 30 kids, especially when they all want to talk. And, that's always a difficult thing anyways. But to have kind of the addition of race, where race is kind of absent in the room, it was quite difficult. And I think as a result, I think it was quite, traumatizing in a way. I didn't really want to participate at all in the conversation. And this teacher knew me quite well at this point, so she knew that I was quite uncomfortable. So she had emailed me later on and said that she was really sorry about what happened, that it doesn't reflect any of her views, and very apologetic. And I said, it's really not your fault, because there was no kind of conversation about how to approach it, especially from I don't know what other first period classes were, but I used to have the morning fitness. So I can't imagine that was a conversation that was as, I don't know, impactful or effective as someone with an English teacher or a social studies teacher, who really kind of, that's part of their job and part of their training already within their own field. And then also professional development. And I think for her, it was really a difficult conversation to have with a class. And then as students, especially the other students I was with that I knew and I was friends with, all of us were seniors, and leaving that class, I didn't feel very good, I would say. And I didn't want to go to school the next day, but I went to school the next day because that's when I had my English classes, and I was able to kind of bring up that conversation and kind of work on what had happened and figure out where to go from there. But I think professional development is one of those things that, in regards to racial bias and equity training, because I had interned with Melissa my senior year, that was one of the things that I knew was probably at the heart of everything, is just about equity and in intersectionality, and kind of working that into your classes and into the curriculum, especially in conversations like this, when I had graduated and went to BC, we had to do a core because we are a liberal, like, arts Jesuit Catholic institution. So I had those conversations in 2 specific sociology classes about race and gender and class, and then gender and society. So I had those in college, but I don't know if everyone else has the same kind of experiences and opportunities once they leave Natick High. So even if a teacher starts, bringing stuff like that, like what is intersectionality into the conversation, I think that would be something that is important.
So let me build off of that and just weave in some of the questions from the attendees, and I'm going to put all of them together a little bit. So just a quick thing. So, you brought up intersectionality, bias. We've had some questions here about just what is in the professional development training, asking if there's questions about bias training, microaggressions, things like that. But then also if outside consultants are brought in, Principal Harrigan, you talked about one person. Sure, that's not the only situation that's happening. But then also just a question about what is the curriculum that is the professional development for the teachers in the elementary school? We've had a lot of conversation here about the high school, obviously, because, of our alumni and that kind of thing, but just how does that weave into kind of the primary school level, and are things like covert racism? How do you have, what is the training around that? How do you handle people who exhibit covert racism, maybe in the professional development training, but then in the school as well? So just kind of all of that together.
So related to the elementary school curriculum, it's been a pretty white curriculum until the recent changes that have allowed us to make some changes. So you would get teachers who would come with expertise about telling different narrative voices around history, but that is not typical elementary teacher training, right? So one part of my own advocacy is working at the state level around working with the preparedness boards for teacher education around that, because we get teachers out of colleges with they have zero technology experience, like can barely work any technology, and they have absolutely no experience in diverse settings or talking about alternative voices in history, right? So we actually interview around those things. So that's the first thing, is interviewing, right? Who comes to the table even. Now, then second, our open circle curriculum out of Wellesley College is the curriculum by which students are taught about social justice, but also how to intervene when social justice norms are being violated. And the teachers all receive that training if they are elementary teachers, every single one, every counselor, everybody. Now, the problem with that is it's only as good as the instructor and then the PLC that moves forward after that, right? So with not that many students of color and not that many staff colleagues of color, the items come up when they come up, and you hear how sometimes these issues come up and the teacher blows it, right? Perfectly great teacher that Izzy had, did her best in a moment. And that was a pretty packed situation at Natick High School. And I don't know if maybe you want to talk about that, Brian, because Brian and I talked about that a lot, right? So here we are as administrators, like, we're like full court press, let's address it head on. Like, we cannot be silent. We need to take this on, right? But you take the risk of taking it on with people who are not ready personally or with the expertise. So there is training, but it's only as good as how often you use the muscles, right? So, and those things are really hard to do. And that's when you hear administration swooping in and like making something happen, either the support or the discipline or what have you. So, like when I taught in Framingham, and before that I taught in Malden, and before that New York City public schools, I got to use those muscles every minute, right? So as a white teacher in a predominantly Black school in New York City, like I learned and I practiced every single day what I had to do. Our teachers don't have that real live lab every single day. So we have to recreate it by bringing the conversations forward a lot. And we've come a long way, but it's not far enough, right? Your experiences here are not foreign to us, but they're the ones we're trying to avoid more and more. But Brian, did you want to talk about that situation?
Yeah.
That was,
I'm sure you recall, right, that we found the graffiti at around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I sent an email to the staff saying, here's what happened. I talked to the 2 staff members who were targeted first. Obviously, they were very personally affected by it. So I sent a note to the staff saying, we're going to have a voluntary faculty meeting at 2:30 today. Please come if you'd like to. And we had almost 100 staff members show up at a moment's notice to talk about this really ugly incident for which we were not prepared. Izzy, I totally agree with you. And we as a staff had what amounted, Dr. Nolin joined us about an hour conversation about what do we do. And we had agreed I'd make a video address to the whole student body. And teachers in their Block 1 class would facilitate a discussion around a series of questions that the faculty drew up that afternoon. Some went well, some went not well. We did make the decision to not do it in English and social studies because this is the work of every educator in every discipline. We didn't want to send the message that, hold on, we can address a crisis later because we're not prepared to address it in this block, right? That's the wrong message. And not a single teacher said, not my job. So I do look back on that and I say, yeah, we weren't prepared. Or if that happens tomorrow, we're still not prepared because it's really challenging work that I'm not prepared to lead. Dr. Nolin, I don't know if you'd feel prepared to lead. Like, it's a really challenging conversation. Doing nothing is far worse. I feel very badly because I think Izzy's experiences were pretty common that morning. There were some students not in first block who got nothing, right? There were others who learned about it from my video, didn't have 2 seconds to process it, and all of a sudden they're being asked to react and reflect, right? It was a really, really hard moment that hopefully we've grown and learned from, but we certainly haven't moved far enough.
But Brian, we have a great moment here. If you'll indulge me, Melissa, I don't want to hijack it.
I'm like, the time is ticking away. Make it short.
Only because
and I see Layla's hand.
So Brian and I have been talking for a long time about making a mandatory critical race theory class for every student in high school, right? So a graduation requirement, right? So here we are wanting to move there, right? But ladies, you know how many graduation requirements you have, right? And like, this may be central to you, but this would mean everyone, every single one, right? So we're going to get pushback about that, right? Because that's going to mean that some other piece that is important to other values is not going to be there. But we feel that passionate about it that we're toying with that, right? So, but of course, we have to get it funded and we have to get the teachers and we have to get the training, and it has to be everybody says this is part of our core competencies. So I just, reacting to that, like I'm sweating a little saying this to you, right? Because I just let our little idea out of the bag, right? Mm-hmm. So like, well, what's going to happen tomorrow? I'm going to get 70 letters telling me, who do you think you are? My kid's not going to take a racial identity course, right?
Well, right? It very well may be part of, when you look at profile of a graduate and how they can be successful in their future in terms of being able to communicate across lines of difference and to take multiple perspectives. I think that it's a good idea. We are coming to the end of our time. We still have just a couple more. I did want to mention that we do have the Natick Freedom Team that is a resource out in the community. It is for the Natick Freedom Team is comprised of people in the community that hold positions, that hear confidential conversations and help individuals find appropriate resources to meet individual needs. So in other words, if a student or even an adult who's listening to this feels as though they have been targeted due to their race or gender or sex, or somehow targeted, they can reach out to the Natick Freedom Team. And the way to reach out to the Natick Freedom Team, that can be found on the Natick Is United website. Okay, so I wanted to get that out there. Also, hold on one moment. And the question was asked if there's a Black Lives Matter group at Natick High School. As far as I know, there is not. Is there a Black Lives Matter group at Natick High School? I guess the person to ask is.
Mr. Harrigan, Principal Harrigan.
There is not.
Okay.
We
Can I just piggyback on that? There's also a question about, is there a diversity task force within the Natick High School, and who is the MEDCO coordinator, and what role do they play in the school vis-a-vis the other Black students, and what is the involvement of families of color in Natick? So just.
Mhm.
You want me to address all those? All right, so Rashida Clayton does a terrific job. She is wonderful. She is the director of our METCO program and an administrator, high school and Wilson Middle School, and plays an exceptional role for all of our students, obviously working quite directly with our METCO students. At the high school, we have all sorts of clubs and activities, some started by students, some started by staff, all of them virtual this year. I do want to say we are about to start a club that unifies the 10 to 15 clubs with a social justice mission. I don't know what we're going to call it, but we're putting staff against it. And one of the things we're hoping to do, and this was a conversation, Layla, you may have recalled, we talked about it last year as well, of actually getting it done, where we would have a one-day student conference. And it's not meant to be a day in the life, never again, check a box. It's meant to have an institutional, every year, a different area of focus. So this year, anti-racism and inclusion, every group. So our peer advocates, our GSA, politics club, like different clubs that could come together, and student-led conversations like this, student lessons, keynote, expo. The idea being, let's start to put some real kind of adult heft behind a day of learning for all students. Again, not merely one day, but I'm trying to create some structure around a culture of anti-racism that is student-led. The student voice has got to be key to everything we do. And part of my job is to create the culture where kids are comfortable coming forward and the vehicles where kids come forward, because too many kids are afraid to right now, and I know that.
And someone asked about compensating students of color if they present for something like that. And I don't know that we've done that before, but we compensate all presenters, so that would be something to consider. I know that sometimes students ask because they want to connect with their teachers in a different way. So I guess it sort of depends on the circumstances, whoever the anonymous person who was asking that.
Okay. Layla, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. Oh, sorry. For Harrigan and Nolin. So would you ever consider hiring like a diversity leadership team that's separate and not necessarily a teacher that could help advise with, I guess, matters of race, a bit more unbiased within the school? And honestly, the Natick Public Schools. So that's my question.
So we were about to, right before closure, I have 72 resumes of people who applied to be on our diversity, equity, and inclusion steering committee to make the decisions for the district around a curriculum audit, around developing a hiring and diversity scenario, and around designing professional development, and also just outreach within the community. So those were our 4 pillars that we were looking for. I have a personal bias that when you hire a diversity coordinator for a district, like it becomes that person's problem, so to speak, one person, and a lot of districts do that. So I'm more of a committee focused group. So, but then the select board did created a task force, and they asked us if we would pause from moving forward on that so that we could conjoin with their townwide group. And when we're talking about issues of systemic racism and educating across our community, we really do have to hold hands with the select board and get at all the big institutions, not just education, to move this forward. You know, housing, transportation, childcare, access to jobs, education, religion, all of these pieces need a piece. So I feel like we're about to join the select board, and then we may resurrect that, Layla, once the select board sort of sets the tone for the whole town.
Okay.
And I just say we have a lot to do on hiring, and I think our alums are going to be some of our greatest future hires. So anything that our alums could do to help. And I think we got to create structure to make that ask real. But we're coming back to you guys for help. So thank you.
Oh, okay. So we are past 8:34. We do have one last question that we did not address. And the question is, any issue with school resource officers? That's a big question to leave as the last question. And it perhaps is a question that, I don't know. I will.
I think what might be helpful is, and I apologize in advance that we don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but maybe our youth panelists, if there's anything that you'd like to just say on that subject, and it can be very, very brief.
I like that idea.
Okay. Izzy?
Yes.
I don't think I personally had any issues because I do, for a long time, my last name was just DeCarvalho in the school system. So I feel like for me, that was a kind of thing where any school resource officer would have never kind of brought that up. I think once I did change my name, I did feel like teachers kind of noticed more, especially teachers I had previously had. But in terms of like other people who might have had more issues, I would say also in particular some special education programs that I was in throughout from Benham up until Wilson. I had that kind of support system, but in some cases I did feel like those were kind of, I would say, against some of the like cultural aspects and stopping at some of the cultural things that I had growing up.
Okay.
So just so you know, Izzy, they didn't mean special education resources.
Right.
They meant our police officers that collaborate with us in schools. So I guess that's a no for you with
Elle, you had your hand up, and I don't know if after this, Melissa, you wanted to transition to just kind of everyone
Yes.
having a final word. Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead, Elle.
Yeah.
Police don't make me feel safe, and I have to stop and ask how much of the budget is going towards keeping police in our schools that could be going towards PD, because that's more important.
Can I just add something to the point here, in that it's the whole topic of school resource officers will be on a future agenda of the school committee, and we will be talking about the role of the officers in the school. So we have received numerous emails and as a part of evaluating the ongoing presence.
And I believe that will be on the 9th. And the answer is $0 of school resources go towards the SRO program.
Correct.
Good question, and thank you for that answer. And you said on the 9th, November 9th?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Donna. Layla?
I was just gonna quickly say that I've never had an issue with the police officer at our school. Like Elle mentioned, I don't necessarily trust police, but Natick, the police department has been really good about being open, at least the ones that are at our school. So O'Shaughnessy, shout out to him. He was my best friend in sophomore year, and I love him. And yeah.
Okay. Kaya?
I never had any issues with the student resources, never went to them, never really wanted to go to them, but.
Okay, thank you. Brian?
I just want to echo Layla's comments. Officer O'Shaughnessy just returned as our school resource officer. This very question of law enforcement and racial justice conversations as part of our opening kind of welcome back. He's been reading The Hate You Give. He's been talking to students in classes at Natick High School about that book and others. So I want us as a community to run right at these issues in a very thoughtful way. And Officer O'Shaughnessy's done a nice job being open to those discussions.
Okay.
I would say to you that Chief Hicks is extremely, I mean, we work together every single day, and it is not lost on any of us the impact in our country that law enforcement have on youth of color. And, you know, I cut my teeth as a teacher in New York City public schools where there was not a good relationship between police and students of color. So I lived and saw exactly that kind of fear. We work very hard not to have it be that way. That doesn't mean that we always succeed, but the force and the school system care about those issues. And I think you'll hear about the education collaboration that does exist for our program. That doesn't mean we're perfect, but that does mean that we aim to not hit these marks the way some of these other programs that we hear about, the way they treat students of color.
Okay, thank you. So we're at the end, and I would like to offer each of you maybe 1-2 sentences tops of last thoughts or comments that you'd like to share with the group, those who are still with us. Last thoughts. Yes, Izzy?
I was just going to ask if any of the officers or any student resources do professional training with the teachers in terms of professional development and diversity training and diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as if you want to create, I would say, a core class or something like that for diversity or critical race theory and things like that. You can always use universities. Excuse the police outside my dorm, but if you would like to,
Did you cue that up?
would like to use some kind of examples in education, I would say for core classes, look at colleges and liberal arts colleges who kind of reflect a high school sense of the arts and the core and kind of like that. Because at least for us in MCAS, which is our Morris College of Arts and Sciences at Boston College, we have to take a diversity core or a diversity oriented class as part of our core, or we do not graduate. Which, you know, there are, I would say, classes that fit that. So I took, you know, Latin American history as part of my minor, and as a result, I was able to do that.
Thank you, Izzy. Who will go next, sharing your last thoughts for tonight? Layla.
I'll quickly just add on to what Izzy said. I definitely advocate for more diversity centered classes. I actually take African diaspora in the world at Spelman. I just shout it again. I definitely think it's a great course, and I know not only Black students will enjoy it, but other students at Natick will enjoy the topics.
Thank you, Layla. Next. Who'd like to share? Kaya.
I just wanted to, this was a great panel. I just wanted to say thank you, and just going off of what Izzy and Layla said, just definitely implementing that no matter what happens, because the same way it's hard to have those conversations, it's even harder on us to have to deal with that every day. And I think doing that would be greater than not doing it at all. So I really just appreciate the effort and everybody coming together to try and make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaya. Yep. Elle?
I think that my last thought would be to, sorry about my dog in the background. Emphasize the importance of ensuring that we're not co-opting our students' work and we're not placing work on students without compensating them or giving them time to rest. And I would also note that I think that I personally still have a lot of healing to do. And I want the school district to really understand the impact that it has.
Thank you. And to our other panelists, last words. Brian?
So my last words, I'm kind of pulling out of the notes I have from my student advisory, my principal's advisory class this year, and that is our goals for the year. So this is from the students and from me. We aspire to have a school that's inclusive, anti-racist, and open to growth in all we do, and a school where 100% of Natick High School students come to school as their authentic selves, where differences are encouraged and celebrated, and everyone feels a sense of belonging.
Donna or Anna?
I'll let Anna have the last word, but I again just want to thank all of you, especially the students. I just learned a lot from you. And I want to say, as a white person, I feel like I'm constantly trying to learn the ways in which I'm complicit in white racism. And it's a struggle, and we need to help our white students with that too. And I recently read Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, and it is a stunning book. So I send you away with a reading assignment. When you get a chance, read Caste. Again, thank you all so much.
Well, I hope I can do this panel justice as the last word, but thank you for coming and speaking to us here, and also to the community at large. I guess I just want everyone to know that the school system's open to learning, to growing, to hearing about these scenarios. You know, there are times I worry. I mean, Elle has been really helpful in making sure that I continue to understand what kind of pain it may be for people to have to come forward to reveal these feelings and to reveal how the school system impacts. I don't think we're in this completely clueless scenario, but we are on a continuum, and that continuum depends on teachers and parents and kids all alike. I'm fortunate to have a school committee that has the same values centered on social justice that we do. Donna is a great example of that leadership. They're willing to put money and muscle and heart behind these kinds of initiatives. So I feel we're very well situated to do that. And I feel fortunate that groups like Natick Is United are willing to have these conversations, and that the community asks hard questions about things like the SRO program and what are we doing for anti-bias education. That doesn't scare us. Those are the questions that we should be asking for a better world. I have 2 teenagers. I want them in that world, the world where those questions get asked and that they help to lead that change. So thank you. We're a learning organization, so lean into us and we'll lean back.
Thank you. So
Thank you so much. I just want to just point out that I put in the chat, I didn't ask you, but I did it. I put in the chat your email, Dr. Nolin, Principal Harrigan, and Dr. McKenzie. I put your emails in there in case any of the attendees had any follow-up questions. I also put into the chat a link for a survey for our attendees of anything that they want to give us feedback on. And we'd really love to hear from the attendees what future panels you'd like Natick Is United to put together. And that you can find a lot of information about our organization and any information about future panels at natickisunited.org. And I want to say thank you so much to all of the panelists. We really appreciate all of that you shared. And I've already gotten 4 or 5 different messages from people who were watching. They've learned so much and they really appreciate it. So I just wanted to pass that feedback along to you guys as well.
what she said, what Guimel said. Yeah, just really quickly, thank you to all of you, and especially to you, to the Natick alums. Really appreciate you agreeing to be on the panel. Your voices matter, youth voices matter, and hopefully those that attend can spread the word that our youth, you all have experiences, information, and ideas. You can be part of the solutions. You can help us see where we can stretch and grow and improve. And as it was mentioned, so important to have these conversations. Racial equity and social change take time. It doesn't happen overnight. We're headed in the right direction. And let's keep doing what we have to do. Remember that this is courageous work. Remember that the work is not equal in terms of who needs to do what. Donna, I appreciate your recommendation, reading Cast, also reading Stamped from the beginning. For all of those out there, it would be also a wonderful book to read, to find out about the history of race and racism and systemic racism in this country. Would be a wonderful start. I just hope that those attending this conversation, no matter what role you play in the Natick community, perhaps you can see this conversation and use it as a model for thinking about inviting youth, particularly BIPOC youth, Black, Indigenous, other people of color youth, into your conversations as you explore how to make your sphere, your world, your organizations more racially equitable and socially just as well. I'm going to stop there and say goodnight for now. And hopefully you fill out our feedback form and send us some ideas for our next panels. Okay, and on that note, good night, everybody. Thank you all.